sounds like this. You're trying to feel sort of like impervious to the cold. And there's sort of a mental focus side of this.
Backcountry Colorado, hiking, backpacking.
I did a lot of marathons. I was convinced to do some ultras.
Climbing, and I do filming and photography.
I just like the ultras because I love the community. I just think that everybody is so nice, whether they're the first place finishers or, you know, us that kind of mosey along.
Welcome, everybody, to Dispatch Radio. We were recording right around the new year, 2017, so wishing you all a very happy new year. Hope you're already out there crushing your resolutions and tackling whatever big, hairy, audacious goal you've got going. Today, we're very excited to have a special guest with us. We've got Scott Carney. Scott, say hi to our listeners.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Well, Scott, we were interested in getting you on for a number of reasons. One, you're right here in Denver, and we love anybody who's outdoorsy and in the Denver area. Two, you're a journalist. We love talking to journalists, particularly outdoor adventure journalists that get out there and tell us about the outdoors. But three, you've got a new book out right now that I'm fully immersed in right now. It was my holiday reading. It's called What Doesn't Kill Us. Could you just give us a quick primer on what this book is about? Because I know that our listeners are going to be fascinated.
Absolutely. It's about how to use the environment to condition your body and actually take control of sort of internal autonomic processes, which on the surface I know sounds like total mumbo jumbo, right? That sounds just crazy. You can't take control of your autonomic nervous system. And I thought so too. And you know, I was a journalist originally writing a piece for Playboy magazine because there was this guy named Wim Hof, based out in the Netherlands, who had a training camp in Poland, who had said that he could consciously raise and lower his body temperature, take control of his immune system, and do a lot of things that sounded just frankly impossible. And I had just written a book about how sometimes like the negative aspects of meditation, things that people don't talk about, but I documented about a dozen cases of people who had gone crazy on meditation retreats. And I thought that Wim Hof was a charlatan guru. And so I flew out to Poland with Playboy and looked at his training session. And my plan was to, do it and sort of watch his claims just fall apart. It turns out that I was completely wrong. Wim Hof is sort of well known for immersing himself in ice for up to 90 minutes at a time, where his body temperature maintains sort of a same level. He's climbed most of the way up Mount Everest in just a pair of shorts and boots. And he does these like really crazy things. And I sort of figured he was a genetic anomaly and that him teaching his methods would actually get people killed. But in the course of about a week training, I ended up hiking a mountain in Poland in just a bathing suit and boots, controlling my body temperature and sweating the whole way to the top. We were on the mountain for about 8 hours. And this sort of opened up my eyes. It's like, look, I was this just dude living in LA at the time, getting overweight, not very motivated, sort of figuring that I was going to maybe take an occasional dip into the Whole Foods organic aisle, but otherwise, proceed into old age and unhealthiness. And then I started doing Wim's methods and found this like really just strength from what he has, which is a breathing method and then cold exposure. So he teaches you to breathe in sort of a conscious way that's actually very fast and very deep, and then to hold your breath for exceedingly long amounts of time. And then get used to like lying in the snow, get used to like jumping into ice water. And by doing these two things, you sort of put your body through this very beneficial stress that makes it very strong very quickly.
And so at the heart of what we're talking about here is what you call hidden biology, that you're basically using this method, kind of hacking your body. I think people are fairly maybe a little tired of that term these days, but certainly applicable here, where you're hacking your body to perform at a different level than you anticipated. And what I'm holding here is the result of how many years' work for you?
About 4 or 5, something like that.
So you spent about 4 or 5 years doing this, and it's a fascinating read. I mean, it's partly kind of historical, kind of how evolution has happened. You cite kind of the early 1900s being somewhat of a turning point with technology. Can you explain that a little bit? What happened in the early 1900s,
Sure.
we believe?
Sure. Well, our species, Homo sapiens, is about 200,000 years old. So we've been, we left Africa in that time, and we, populated the new and the old world. We were up, climbing up mountains. We crossed the Alps, and basically no technology. We had technology. It was like fur skins and slippers and maybe fire and things like that, but pretty much exposed to the elements at a constant basis, and including we would have these constant variations in temperature and air pressure, just the storm, sleet, whatever. Our bodies had to deal with that stuff going on to us. As the species, as we approach the modern day, our technology gets better and better, and we're able to insulate ourselves from the environment. And with every sort of age, we get a little bit more comfortable, and we outsource our physical potential to the stuff around us, the things that we can create. But then there's this radical departure in about 1900, maybe a little later, maybe like 1930, 1940, where everyone has climate control, right? Where you go in and you can flip on a switch and you'll have an electric light. You can move a dial, and you'll go to a constant temperature of like 72 degrees all year long. And basically, we're factoring out the natural oscillations that our body was designed to have. And by doing that, we're basically not using what you said as a hidden biology in all of us, because we've actually hidden it from ourselves. And let's take one example. There's something that we have. Every human is born with called brown fat or brown adipose tissue, and this is it looks just like fat, except it's brown in color. And it's in our shoulders and our thorax. And the reason why humans are born with it is, babies have no musculature to heat their bodies, and they have a really high surface area to mass ratio, which means they lose heat very quickly. And babies die if they're not kept, if they're not warm. You think about a premature baby, you put them in an incubator, it's because they lose heat incredibly quickly. But without a sort of a developed digestive system or developed muscles, which are the two ways that humans heat ourselves. It's the action of digestion, it's the action of our muscles. There's only one other thing to do, which is use this tissue, which is called brown fat, its role is to suck white fat, or the normal stuff around your waistline, and burn it for heat energy. And it's incredibly good at doing that. And as we grow older, we rely more and more on our environment, our heating and such. And we actually lose most of our brown fat by the time we're in our 20s. And the interesting thing is that people who are actually raised in cold environments never really lose their brown fat. They can actually build up, immense stores of it. And one of the reasons of why we get fat, why we have those waistlines, is because, and why we can't exercise it off, right? You would rather burn muscle than you would burn fat, is because that's waiting there to be used to heat your body. And brown fat's the trick to doing that. And the way you build up brown fat is you get into cold environments where you need to use it.
And I want to talk a little bit about some of the, the how-tos here, because, I mentioned the book is kind of a blend of things. That you get a bit of a history of kind of how we got here. And I think most of our listeners can kind of agree that generally mankind is a weaker species than we ever have been. But there's folks out there trying to change that. I know that, for instance, running groups like Front Range Cross Country here in Denver, that they get out in the snow and they love the elements, and I know that they feel the effects that you have felt in kind of this experiment of your own. So you've got the historical kind of how we got here. You also have a bit of the how-to. You take us through your process and kind of what you did to get into the Hoff method and through some of your daily routine, which I want to touch on. But you also have a personal journey here where you started. I want to read from a section here where you mentioned You felt a sinking feeling that I had been getting past my prime when you kind of set out to write this book. You certainly weren't meaning to transcend your life. You were meaning to debunk someone you called a charlatan. But will you tell us a little bit about your personal journey from describing yourself as feeling like you're approaching your, past your prime years to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I was a pretty normal guy with a pretty normal athletic routine, not an ultra runner or anything like that. Just, a journalist. My exercise was mostly going out in the field and doing stories. And, I was in I think I was like 31 when I wrote that. I had, this expanding waistline. I was sort of watching my belly sort of threaten my belt and I didn't really like it, but I sort of thought that was the inevitable course of daily events. And then meeting Wim and having, sort of my mind blown, I think that it was sort of a cynical journey. Like I was going to basically saying that my belly was right all along and Wim is the charlatan. That's sort of a subconscious thing going on here. It turns out that he's able to show me a great deal of internal strength and things that I can push myself into new places. And, over the course of these 4 years, I sort of do increasingly difficult and sort of crazy feats. The biggest one is at the end of the book, I summit, or I get to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, and I'm just wearing a shorts. And we do it in a very, very fast period of time. Usually it takes about 5 days to summit Mount Kilimanjaro, mostly because of the dangers of altitude sickness. We did it in 28 hours, just sort of barreled up using this breathing method to train our bodies to do great things. And, I was in probably the best shape of my life when I finished writing the book. Now it's after the holiday season, so I'm gaining weight again.
Right, but have you continued this practice in your daily life now? I mean, do you do these breathing exercises and do the things that are in your book? Do you still do that today?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just swimming in Puget Sound yesterday, funnily enough, in Seattle. I was visiting my family, and I just find it a thrill to get into a really cold environment and then feel that my body can handle it. And then I get this huge endorphin rush. I mean, there's something, most people are like, why the hell would I ever roll in snow or jump into cold water? Because it looks, from an outsider perspective, it looks horrible. But the thing is, once you go into this environment and then find out that you can actually be okay in it, it's just this enormous endorphin rush, adrenaline and all these like feel good hormones come out because your body is suddenly kicked into like high gear. You're like really, really alive. And Colorado has so many great mountain lakes to do this in. Not so much in Denver. I actually tried to get the city council to let me jump into the reservoirs in Denver, and they won't let me do it, which is a big problem. And I think we should fight to be able to jump into our own lakes. But yeah, I mean, I really love the feeling and that sense of accomplishment and overcoming something that most people think is crazy.
Well, I think you're right. Most people do think it's crazy. Our listeners tend to be the kind of crazy type, so I can imagine a lot of people kind of nodding their heads, understanding the sensation. For those that are uninitiated, what do you think about this for a starter kit? My birthday last year, I went up to Jenny's cabin in Breckenridge, up near Breckenridge. You hike up in the snow, and there's a hot sauna. And what we were doing is we were stripping naked, jumping in the snow, jumping in the sauna. Is that kind of getting towards what you're talking about here?
Well, so that's a great exercise for your circulatory system. So, because normally people don't exercise, you have like all of these muscles in the veins in your extremities that you have no conscious control over. Like you can't squinch them shut. But when you're in the cold, they'll squinch and then they'll force blood to the core in order to preserve your core heat. Because most of us don't have conscious control over that. The only way to trigger those responses is actually by doing exactly what you're doing, by going into the cold and then going into the hot, going into the cold, going to the hot. And that's like sort of like lifting weights for your cardiovascular system. So I think that's great. There's a lot more to the method than that. That's a very physical exercise, like lifting weights. But there's the other part in this method is actually a metabolic exercise where you put yourself in an environment that will trigger an autonomic response, such as shivering, for instance, and then suppressing that urge to shiver, which is not that hard to do. You just think away shivering, basically. And by doing that, you force your body to come up with a different way to heat itself. And usually this is like building up brown fat or building up some sort of metabolic activity because your body just doesn't want to give up and let you go die of hypothermia. And that's a different sort of exercise, but in the same theme, but it works in a whole different inner biology.
Well, I think we've certainly piqued people's interest. I definitely highly recommend What Doesn't Kill Us by Scott Carney. It's available on Amazon starting January 3rd. Is that right?
January 3rd, yeah, right, and just a couple days away.
And you mentioned it's also going to be on Audible.
It will be an audiobook. It might come out a little later in the month because they have to review it. But yeah, it's all recorded and we're ready to sell it.
Well, Dispatch Nation, definitely highly recommend this. Again, if you're interested in the history of our physiology, how we got here, if you're interested in the Hoff method and how it works and what the principle is behind it, if you're interested in a good personal journey of someone starting from feeling like they're approaching their past peak time to hiking Kilimanjaro in their shorts in 28 hours, if you're interested in just good storytelling, this is a great read. I highly recommend it.
We're having a book launch party at the Book Bar in Denver, which is, I saw that you had Feral on your website.
Yes. I purchased many a Christmas gift at Feral this holiday, at the Book Bar this holiday season.
Great. Well, we're right down there. It's going to be on January 7th. And, sort of come one, come all. We might do a shirtless run around the block if I can convince enough people to go do that. And it's cold enough.
Well,
sometimes it's
that was an excellent segue because the two things I wanted to do, I want to end on your daily routine. I just want to hear how you spend your mornings because it sounds simple but elegant. And then two, how we can interact with you. So I think January 7th, book launch at the Book Bar on Tennyson Street, shirtless run on Tennyson Street there, maybe partnering with Jimmy Funkhauser over at their Feral Mountain. Get some of those crazy front range cross country guys out there. I'm sure that we can get a nice crowd for that. So that'd be a great time to connect with you and talk to you more. So let me hear more let me take us through your daily routine, your morning routine.
Well, it's, you sort of wake up and before you eat, and it's important to do this on an empty stomach, is you get in a seated position, on a couch. You could also lie down on your back on like a yoga mat if you want. And then it's a hyperventilation and then a breath retention. So you hyperventilate, which is not like the uncontrolled, panicky hyperventilation, but like more of a deep, fast breathing. It sounds like this. For about 30 breaths. And you'll get dizzy and you might feel some tingling, and that's all totally normal. And then on the last breath, you let all the air out of your lungs and then hold it. And you hold it for as long as you can with this breath out retention. And then usually you'll end up holding your breath a lot longer than you might expect doing that. And I do 3 rounds of this until I've reached, the first one I do about a 1-minute retention. The second one is a 2-minute retention. And the third time I'm able to do a 3-minute retention. Usually people starting out may not get to that level, but it's also not unheard of at all. And then at the end of that, I'll do one more round of breathing. And I'll do push-ups and with no air in my lungs, and I'll do probably about 50 usually is what I aim for, and it's usually pretty easy to do sort of these breath out push-ups, which really sort of, it's funny, it sounds really hard to do without breathing, but it gets these are very easy push-ups because you've hyperoxygenated your blood and you've blown off all the CO2 from your system. Then I'll do like an inversion of some sort. I'll do sort of like a headstand and then a cold shower, or if I'm lucky enough, we're rolling in the snow. And and then when I'm in the cold shower, what you're aiming to do is suppress the shiver response. Like you're trying to feel sort of like impervious to the cold. And there's sort of a mental focus side of this. But just being in the cold, triggering vasoconstriction, and being there for a little bit just does, wonders. And you get out and you're all refreshed and full of endorphins. And it's great.
Well, excellent, Scott. Really appreciate the time. How can people find you and how can they find the book?
ScottCarney.com is my website. Amazon books. You can get signed copies of the book over at the Boulder Bookstore. I'll be doing a talk there, I think, at the end of the month on the 31st, tattered cover. I'll be up in Steamboat, and I'm all over Colorado for this. But yeah, I mean, Google is a great friend.
And January 7th, we'll be looking forward to seeing you at the Book Bar on Tennyson for that
All right,
shirtless run.
I'm excited.
All
Bring
right.
bring your shorts.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, take care. Bye.